Insomniac's version of Spider-Man is one of the best renditions of the character in recent times. With a 10 out of 10 story, incredible characters, and of course an incredible site to explore in, it's definitely hands down one of the greatest superhero games ever created. Even after almost 6 years of its full release, it still hasn't aged. Yuri Lowenthal brings his A-game to this character, and I really couldn't imagine anyone else in this role. Despite having an iconic career chock full of great voicing, this is probably his best role yet. I've always seen his voice as being top 2 alongside Josh Keaton from Spectacular Spider-Man, and definitely up there with some of the best of all time. He betrays Spider-Man in every single emotion, and he definitely is an Oscar-worthy voice actor. When this game first released, it was almost like we had a weight off our shoulders. Before this game, we had some very mediocre Spider-Man games, and just ones that weren't good at all. From Spider-Man 3 to, of course, Spider-Man Friend or Foe. But when E3 2016 rolled around, we saw that Insomniac Games were going to be developing a new Spider-Man game for 2018. When the first trailer launched, it looked like this was going to be the full-fledged Spider-Man experience. And when that shit hit shelves at September 7th, 2018, we were in for a treat tonight. The story was an absolute 10 out of 10, Yuri Lowenthal voicing Spider-Man was also a 10 out of 10, and of course an access of roster to over 42 Spider-Man suits at the time. And of course, judging by what we have now with Spider-Man 2, this first blew fans away. If that wasn't enough, they added the Tobey Maguire suit in December of 2018, and of course, we all know how that went. This was a full-blown Spider-Man experience we all wanted, and something we all dreamed of. The start felt more like a AAA blockbuster movie if anything else. From helping civilians, crawling through the vents, and eventually defeating Kingpin as the final boss. But then you're all of a sudden chucked into a heartwarming scene with Peter and Dr. Octavius' relationship and how he has to shut down his lab due to Norman Osborn. From solving problems in the lab to eventually going out into the city again and working with Yuri to enable all of the security radio towers. I think that one of their best relationships has to be with Peter and Yuri. These two have some of the best chemistry in the story, and you can tell they are definitely partners and very serious worth working together, even though if Peter Parker doesn't really take himself seriously well on the job. Yuri is obviously a very important character in the story and does play a very big part in the game. From going back and forth between calls with her while you're swinging through the city to eventually the DLCs where she eventually goes rogue and turns into Wraith. But all in all, I do think Yuri is definitely one of the best in the series. Of course, like with most Spider-Man games, you get a plethora of different side missions to take on. There is a few break-ins you have to deal with during the start of the game, but it does get a lot bit more advanced as you go through the end of the game. Such as getting into brawls with Sable agents, and getting into much higher speed car chases than ever before. However, that is just to name a few. The backpacks you collect throughout the game definitely give a little bit of insight into Peter's origin and its story. It's also cool to see some references from the comics and also from this universe of how Peter got his powers. But of course, halfway through after the Kingpin fight, Peter is feeling a little bit devious and goes full White Spider, and this is going to be one of the best suits ever created for this character. With the blue and red more subtle materials and the White Spider being completely carbon fibre to absorb shock absorption and of course making Peter Parker a lot stronger in the suit. It was also Insomniac's original idea to include the White Spider logo to differentiate their outfit from other Spider-Man outfits in the past. And you really got a problem if you think this suit looks absolute shit, because this is an absolute masterpiece. Now of course the one big gripe that everyone hates about this game is the MJ missions. Now of course, like everyone else, I absolutely hated these missions and I think they should have just taken about the game completely. However, I think people are too harsh on this, especially when there's less scenes in this, especially what we got in Spider-Man 2 and she actually does have a gun in Spider-Man 2. And especially all the people that say that she's ugly. I mean, I don't really understand that whole argument, especially when she's actually helping Spider-Man or Peter Parker in the plot. So yeah, that really just goes all over my head. I don't really ever think about any of that shit. But I of course do disagree that these missions really shouldn't have been in the game and we should have just saw MJ in multiple cutscenes. It's crazy to me that people actually hate on this version of MJ but will still praise Kirsten Dunst as if she wasn't a damsel in distress. But we gotta move past that as we get into the villains of this game, because this is where the secret sauce really is. Now of course, if you didn't know already, we fight the Sinister Six throughout this whole entire game. Of course, Shocker is one of the main boss fights, and I think this is probably one of the more well made boss fights throughout the game you encounter. I think when it comes to some Sinister Six boss fights, they are a little bit left, right and centre, because some of them do feel a bit overpowered and then some of them feel easy as hell. Especially when the game gets lazy and just makes you fight two at once, like just to break down the game a little bit, which I feel like if we had to face all these guys, I think we should just do at least one at a time. It would make the game feel more expansive, especially if we're fighting this many villains. I mean, I think it's cool that we have to fight both, but it definitely does give a little bit more overwhelming to the situation. Throughout all the boss fights, I genuinely believe the Doc Ock one was definitely the hardest, and that really was the final boss. I mean, hell, it is the final boss, but it definitely felt like it. Not many of these fights actually felt like a boss fight. But I'm actually very glad they did tone up the difficulty in these boss fights and made Kraven a lot harder to kill. No pun intended. Now, Martin Lee is mainly the main villain of the game at most parts until eventually Doc Ock comes along. And some of the Mr. Negative sections are some of the best parts in this game. I mean, I gotta tell you, that helicopter fight definitely gives it a run for its money. And also another thing that this game does really well is the adaptation between Peter and Martin Lee itself. He starts helping out at Feast and becomes friends with Aunt May, only to realise he is head of the demons and he actually must be stopped. And it also has that kind of alter ego between Peter Parker and Spider-Man that we must stop this guy at all costs until he destroys the city entirely. Even before the main villains come along, Martin Lee actually shapes himself and solidifies himself as a really meaningful villain in this game, even especially killing Miles' father, causing Miles to become eventually Spider-Man in the future, and is of course responsible for causing the whole City Hall massacre, which goes on to play a very big part in the story afterwards. But my all-time favourite fight scene in this game between Mr. Negative has got to be the train sequence. Obviously that little homage to Spider-Man 2, but also a little bit of more originality comes in clutch with this one. And this is really the fight that concludes the Mr. Negative solo arc and brings it into the Sinister Six arc at the end of the game. Insomniac has done a great job of making each Sinister Six member incredibly comic accurate and very well known to their alter egos. But with also a few slight changes, like Rhino and Scorpion having armour, to Electro having his comic accurate masks scarred right into his face, and having Spider-Man get his full ass beat shows that he isn't superhuman, he isn't Kratos, but he is a human being after all, and he is going to get his ass handed to him every now and then. And that's of course another characteristic from the comics that this game gets perfectly right. Alongside Yuri and MJ, we of course got Silver Sable in this game, which was a very big surprise when I first found this out. She portrays herself as more of an anti-hero in this game, trying to help out Spider-Man but also trying to abide by the law and trying to save the city. And it's good to see her appear in the third and final DLC of this game in actually order to take down Hammerhead. She definitely served a big part in the story and I'm actually glad she was included in this game. With other side characters making an appearance were Black Cat and of course Hammerhead in the DLCs. Every single one of the DLC packs involved each character's story. Whether it was Yuri trying to become the vigilante that she would eventually become, trying to seek out the death of our beloved officer that died early at the start of the DLC, or Miles' training just to become a better Spider-Man, everything else linked together and pushed forward into the second game. But of course we gotta talk about the ending to this very powerful story. The conversation between Peter Parker and Doc Ock is truly heartbreaking, showing that he definitely lost his mind with the arms and Peter Parker saw him as a father figure. It's definitely the best voice acting that we've got about both these characters so far in this game, especially for an ending to a superhero game. And if that wasn't enough weight to put on your shoulders, the direct next scene after that is of course Aunt May's death, where she eventually has to pass away in order to save a million other different lives. And it's definitely a very tough challenge for Peter as he doesn't know which one to save. This gives us a very impactful ending and shows that Peter Parker is always going to lose someone at the end of any kind of Spider-Man movie, and he's also going to be a very big character of grief. However, the story ends on a high note with Peter and MJ getting back together and Peter and MJ solidifying her new job in the Daily Bugle. But the story isn't just the one that is a complete 10 out of 10 in this game, as they have completely perfected the web swinging and of course other aspects of this game. The web swing is probably one of the best we've ever seen in any type of Spider-Man game, and they have really nailed it this time around. While you're swinging around the city, the body of Spider-Man really has some weight to it, and you can actually feel him going around every single corner. Not to mention the traversal effects that you can do and interact with the environment also has changed up here. This makes the swing in this game fully immersive to the player and actually wants you to explore the city a whole lot more, and it definitely is satisfying when you go through it completely. I probably never felt this best swinging since probably Spider-Man 2, and I think this is definitely, it gives it a run for its money, especially when you compare this two side by side. One is 20 years old, but this one's only around 6 years old, and they, of course, this is a foundation that they built upon to of course make Spider-Man 2's web swimming almost perfect. Which leads us into the combat for this game, and it's also very fun. Now of course Spider-Man isn't Batman, and he isn't going to be as fluid in combat as Batman really is in the Arkham games, and this is nowhere near as good as the Arkham games combat. I think this is really where this game lacks in some areas, but it is really just good enough, especially if you just put together the type of web combinations you can do and the gadgets you've got within your reach. You can really do a lot with this combat. The web gadgets allow for easy creativity and definitely a lot of exploration within the webs, especially if you combine that with a suit power of your choosing, and you can make the combat a lot easier in your favour. Going on to the stealth is of course not Batman Arkham, but it's definitely good enough, as of course Spider-Man can only be as stealthy as he can. He's not obviously going to be Batman, and he's not going to be completely sneaky all the time. There is the occasional stealth throughout the game, but you don't do as much as you would do combat. However, all in all, we can tell why this game was so critically acclaimed when it first released by everyone. The characters felt well written and very expanded upon. We had the origins of Doc Ock told in the most different way possible in comparisons to other Spider-Man media. P had emotional relationships with various people throughout the game, such as MJ and Aunt May. And as far as the gameplay went, it was practically perfect and gave us everything that took from the original Spider-Man games and implemented it into one incredible masterpiece. So guys, let me know down below and what your thoughts are of Spider-Man 2018. Can you believe it's been 6 years of this game, and have you ever planned on going back and reliving some of those memories of this game? Obviously it's one of the greatest of all time, and we probably will never see anything else like it in our future. And of course we will see other superhero titles try to copy off this, especially even other Marvel titles. I wouldn't be surprised if Wolverine tries to copy a page out of this game's book. But you know, we can all dream, and we can all just go for something else that could just be as good as this to come out. However, let me know your guys' thoughts are down in the comment section. I'd love to hear your thoughts down below. But without further ado guys, thank you very much for watching. I'll catch you guys in the next one. Peace.